Welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for August 13th, 2013. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. I'm joined today by Jim Clausing and Tony Tortorici, and I'm John Hogoboom. So I think our first story is from you, Tony, and you had some information about some techniques that some of the hackers are using on mobile devices now related to advertising. Yeah,
the article that I read recently deals with phone hackers and how they're building ad networks to use as a threat vector where they're sending out mail code. Basically what they're doing is they're targeting apps on phones that you may see a banner ad down at the bottom, and they're actually trying to get people to use their ad networks. And in turn, what happens is when you're using these mobile apps, they're either free or they're pay, but the main thing is the ad network that they're using. Whenever you're using these mobile devices, every once in a while the ad will be rolling, and you'll get a bit of advertisement that actually it has mail code behind it. The real interesting thing about it is it's random. So it doesn't happen every time, and the ad networks will keep scrolling through legitimate ads, and then all of a sudden, bam, and it'll hit the mobile device and in turn infect it. So you're not quite sure what app's going to be bad or anything like that. It's that rolling advertisement, and we are seeing, based on this article, that certain groups are building these ad networks and selling it off to people that want to use ad networks to make a little bit of extra money for their mobile apps, and in turn, no one knows that there's actually some devious stuff happening behind them. So the article is really interesting, and I definitely suggest that to be a quick read for people.
Right. So, you know, in the old school web-based space, we had a term for this. It was called malvertising. You actually look it up, and basically what it is, it's malware that's delivered in advertisements. So you had these websites that would have some ad integration with a third-party ad network, and they would, you know, if someone went to their website, that person's website, and they clicked on the ad, now that gets like an impression, and that, you know, that website might get some revenue. So it's kind of like a click ad type of revenue stream.
So, exactly. It's taking old tricks that used to be used for web browsing, and now people are looking at this new platform, mobile devices, and, you know, can we use these old tricks? I mean, they worked very good in the past. What can we do with these old tricks for this brand new platform? And things are starting to work. This is a prime example of it.
Right. And a lot of these apps, as we know, legitimate apps, I should mention, they need a way to monetize their app, or they want to gain some revenue. They might give away the app for free, but they want to get some revenue. So they'll integrate these ads with these ad networks into their app, and in doing so, they might not know whether or not how, basically they're trusting that whatever ads they pull in from these ad networks are going to be benign. But as we found out here, that's not the case, and in some cases, what they've been seeing is some of these malicious ads are actually causing the phone to do SMS texting to those premium SMS services that might charge you $9.95 for a text message and whatnot. In cases like that, the malicious actor actually is operating that premium SMS text service, and they get the revenue. So the more phones they can infect, the more phones they have trying to text to it, the more money they get off of that type of thing. And I even saw quoted in an article there that I think some of the Russian vendors, or the Russian malicious actors, I should say, running some of these malicious ad networks are getting about a $12,000 a month revenue stream out of that. So that's pretty significant when you look at it.
Absolutely, and they're getting paid on both sides, you know, up front with the advertising network and those premium SMS sites. So,
all right, thanks for that story. It's a good one. So the next story we have is about Twitter, and looks like they have a new authentication scheme, Jim?
Came across this article last week, and back in May, Twitter had rolled out a two-factor authentication scheme that was similar to some of the other two-factor authentication schemes out there, that basically it would send an SMS text message with a code that you then had to enter. And this new scheme is really nice in that it doesn't rely on any sort of a shared secret. It requires you to have an app on a mobile device that generates an RSA private-public key pair, and it keeps the private key just on the mobile device, and all the Twitter ever has is the public key. When you try to log in someplace else, it sends a challenge to the app, which you can then approve. All the encryption takes place within the app, and you send back the approval. If you don't, for some reason, have your mobile device handy, they have a novel way of doing the backup codes. And again, the legitimate thing only exists on your end. What they do is, it was based on S-Key, which was a scheme that I think it came out in the late 90s. But basically, you take the backup code, you basically hash it 10,000 times, and the next one would be hashing it 9,999 times, next is 9,998 times. Basically, hashing, you can go forward, but you can't go backward, so if you use them in reverse order, you have to have had the original one to generate the backup codes. I haven't had a chance to test it out or talk to anybody who's actually used the new scheme, but it does look like it's got the potential to avoid some of the drawbacks of the shared secret, where basically Twitter or whoever on the other end had to know something that you knew, and if it got compromised on either end, then all bets were off. And this one also doesn't rely on SMS as some of the other ones do. So it's an interesting new twist on this, and like I said, I haven't had a chance to play with it to see how well it works, but just thought it was a new, interesting development.
Yeah, I agree. And, I would expect, or I guess I would hope, that this is kind of the first of many to come. I kind of found it a little interesting. Twitter is the first to kind of break ground, so to speak, in this kind of manner. But, I guess, they've had some issues in the past where accounts have been compromised and, things have been, published on Twitter feeds that shouldn't have been, that got picked up by the media, et cetera. So it's understandable. But I could see for banking, a lot of banks have gone the two-factor authentication route, notably with SMS, text messaging. This one's a little bit even better, I think, because it's in their own stream, so to speak. So it's in their app on your mobile device, and there's no real way to compromise the vector in between. So with SMS text messaging, you're using a third party to send that text message, be whatever the mobile provider is, where in this case they kind of have control of the point-to-point communication, which is nice. And I could see, a lot of these other vendors or other websites might do this in the future. I would hope that they do, such as other banks and whatnot, maybe with their apps do some kind of integration with a similar kind of thing. And, as we've said before, people's machines get infected all the time. We've talked about Zeus a lot, which is a big one for grabbing login IDs and passwords. It's not exclusively grabbing logins and passwords for banks, Zeus type botnets. They will grab passwords for all kinds of things, like Facebook and Twitter. So these kinds of login and password type systems are really kind of stuck in the dark ages, in my opinion. This two-factor, while not perfect, definitely adds another layer that makes it a lot more complicated, a lot more complex for an attacker to gain access to your accounts on various systems, because now they would need more than just a login ID and password. They need this other additional second factor of authentication. Yeah,
and now this still suffers from the problem of if somebody happens to get their hands on your phone, they could still, masquerade as you. But with the social media sites being the targets for a lot of these lately, folks try to steal LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook kinds of passwords. I'm not really surprised that it's one of these social media sites that decides to try to tackle the problem again.
Right. I'd like to add that, you guys have brought up two extremely important components of the security around this. One, obviously, what you said, Jim, would be the physical security around your mobile device itself. And, if that gets stolen or you lose that in the back of the cab, that's definitely a problem. But the other one is the one that John was talking about is, decreasing the amount of links in your chain when it comes down to security. It's between the mobile device and the site instead of having to rely on other means of communication like SMS. So I do think it's a positive move forward, definitely.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out as it gets rolled out and people start using it.
Yeah, I agree, and I would predict, or I hope, that it's going to become more prevalent, this type of thing, with other types of popular sites, such as Twitter and other types of sites like that, like the social media. All right, so the next story is one that I kind of looked at, and I thought it was interesting. It's kind of maybe more amusing, although there is some very definite negative side effects to this story that are potentially could happen. This story comes from besttechie.com covered it, but a particular researcher had discovered that there is a bug in certain models of Xerox scanners. And the bug, which is really interesting, I have a picture of one of the screenshots of what the printout looked like before he scanned it in and after he scanned it. You can see in this screenshot here that some of the 6s have been converted to 8s. So we have a 6540 became an 8540, and then over here up on the top, I think this 5460 became a 5480. And when you look at it, it's really interesting to me because it's not just a blurred image. It actually looks like an 8. So you can actually see the indentation to the left of the 8 where you wouldn't normally have that on the 6. So he did some research into this. It looks like this, and the first thing I thought about this was, well, is this an OCR, optical character recognition issue where it's, thinking it's a 6 or thinking it's an 8 and actually replacing it? But that's not really what's happening here at all. There's no OCR in play. This is actually, he's putting a document down and scanning it in, and in the process of it being scanned in, there's some compression that goes on. So they think that they've narrowed this down to in the Xerox scanners, and as far as I know, this problem is somewhat exclusive to Xerox and probably the firmware inside these particular scanners. I don't know how extensive this is or if it goes beyond Xerox. But in the process of scanning, when you use a scanner and you scan it in, it'll typically have some kind of compression because if you tried to scan a document in and you did it bit by bit, it would be a huge file. So they have different algorithms for compressing that, and some of that's built into the hardware of the device. So they use the JBIG2 compression scheme, and apparently there might be some sort of defect in there or something that they've identified that will kind of corrupt certain characters at certain resolutions, such as this. So they're still looking into it. Xerox has acknowledged the problem in here, but you could see how this could potentially be a real problem. If you're scanning something and faxing it to somebody, there's a potential that, certain numbers are going to get transposed, and, could be one of the examples he gave, what if it's an architectural drawing or something where you're saying I need, the height of the ceiling to be 6 foot here or something, but instead it becomes 8 foot. That could, really mess things up in the long run. So there are a lot of potential for problems along the way if this isn't identified. And I was kind of surprised that this hasn't been identified sooner, to be honest, that somebody wouldn't have noticed this sooner. But an interesting little flaw, and it looks like it's not necessarily, I don't know that it's specific to Xerox, but it does look like it's probably rooted in this particular compression scheme, the JBIG2 compression scheme is what they're identifying it as. So an interesting little thing, if you have one of these scanners, I recommend you check the article out. And if you have one of these scanners, it might be interesting to experiment yourself, see if you can reproduce this problem. And we'd be more than interested to hear your results on that, or certainly I would.
Yeah, the problem actually is in the JBIG2 algorithm itself. The Xerox, one of their solutions to the issue is to turn off the JBIG2 compression and/or substitute TIFF compression. It was probably a bad choice when they were defining the compression algorithm in the first place. But yeah, it's an interesting artifact of the compression algorithm itself. So it's quite possible that other devices or other situations where you're using JBIG2, you could run into similar issues.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it seems interesting to me, and I guess it would be additionally interesting to find out if there's other devices that suffer from this because they also use the JBIG2 algorithm. Because it does sound like you're saying, it sounds like it's a problem inside that algorithm in the way it does some kind of substitution. If it sees a pattern once before, it tries to repeat it again, and it can get confused sometimes or mess up the scan based on that effect.
Right. There's a Sophos article that describes it this way. JBIG2 has a clever yet, with hindsight, very reckless feature. If two swatches of the image look like each other, the same data is used for both swatches, so they effectively become identical.
So yeah, that kind of helps explain how a 6 could become an 8, because if it sees an 8 somewhere else beforehand, and now it sees this 6, and it looks close enough to what that other 8 did, it might replace it with the swatch that it had for the original 8, which now on the new output, or the scanned output, looks like an 8 instead of a 6. So very interesting. Interesting little side effect of the algorithm there. All right. So moving forward to the internet weather. And we don't have much new here, but there are a couple of recurrences. So last week we had talked about port 5038 TCP. We probably talked about it before as well. It's related to the Asterisk VoIP management interface. So Asterisk is a VoIP server, and this particular port is for management of it. So you can log into it and administrate the VoIP server. And we're also seeing scanning activity on port 22 TCP and 3306 TCP, which is MySQL, 22 TCP being SSH. And so this is likely some type of brute force scanning. They're scanning for devices listening on port 5038 TCP, and once they identify them, they're probably going to try to brute force their way in by doing password guessing and then try to compromise that and use it for something else. I think Brian had pointed out last week that it's not necessarily that they're trying to compromise your VoIP traffic. They probably just want to compromise the server itself and use it for whatever they want. But there could be cases where they're trying to use it for VoIP fraud or toll fraud as well, but not necessarily. The next one was 2345 TCP. We're seeing an increase on traffic on this. This is kind of, and I'm not even quite sure, I'd do some research on this, but the IANA registered name for this is DBM. The only references I could find for DBM is a very old, back to the 1970s, software written by, I believe, one of the guys from AT&T, oddly enough, called Database Manager. It was actually written by Ken Thompson. I don't know if that's what this port is related to or not. I highly suspect that whoever's scanning for it right now is not looking for that well-known IANA port that it's actually registered under. But that's just a little interesting side note. It was a very early database, non-relational type of database software written by Ken Thompson of AT&T. In any event, I highly suspect that this might be related to HP OpenView Network Node Manager, which is not the IANA official port registered for this. However, they do use this port as part of their software. And there's some known vulnerabilities for it that have been around over the years for HP OpenView. So it's possible. There's only a few sources in China scanning for this, but when they are scanning for it, they're doing it very aggressively. So normally we'll see a scanner doing maybe 6 million flows an hour. These guys are doing upwards of 50 million flows an hour. So that's quite aggressive scanning the internet at large for that. So if you have that port open, take a look at it. Or if you, for whatever reason, have your HP OpenView accessible to the internet, that might be something you want to take a look at as well. I think we talked about this one as well last week. 1521 TCP Oracle, seeing additional scanning, and probably last week we had noticed that it was elevated, but it's continuing to stay elevated, whereas there was kind of a noise floor of not very much activity looking for it, devices running the Oracle SQL listener. We're seeing a lot more aggressive scanning activity. Most of it's coming from China and the U.S., and I think Jim probably observed last week that this could possibly be related to the fact that Oracle released a bunch of patches. So I think they do quarterly or something patches, right, Jim? And this this increase in activity kind of coincides with the release of all of their patches, which is common practice that these bad actors, once a vendor releases patches for their product, that gives the bad guy basically the blueprint to figure out, okay, well, how can I exploit this for people who don't patch their software? So that might be why people are scanning for this at this time. 81 TCP, no real official port for this either in IANA, but I tagged it as HTTP alternate. It happens to be frequently used as kind of a port 80 TCP is the well-known for HTTP web-based traffic. A lot of additional things. Sometimes admin interfaces run on port 81 TCP. That might be the case here. But in any event, it's probably some type of web-based scanning they're doing here. They're looking for web-based services running on 81 TCP. And most of the probes are coming out of China, Russia, and the U.S. It's not a lot of them. It's a small number of them, probably less than 10, I think it was. And we've seen, we had a very low noise floor of this. There's not really much scanning going on in general on this port on a regular basis, but we did see, some aggressive uptick in scanning on it to about 6 million flows a few days ago. So that's another one to keep an eye out for. And in terms of the top most probed ports, no real big changes here. 445 TCP, that's your conflict and your weak file sharing type stuff. 1433 is Microsoft SQL Server. 53 UDP could be related to DNS amplification attacks, backscatter type activity related to that. Could be people looking for open resolvers on the internet, so they're scanning, looking for other open DNS resolvers that they can use as part of their attacks. Let's see, 8080 TCP, another type of HTTP alternate type of web port. I frequently mention Tomcat runs on this, the Tomcat administrative interface. I happen to have some inside information that there's more than one actor set out there trying to compromise Tomcat servers. So if you're running Tomcat and you have your admin interface exposed to the internet on port 8080, I would say try to filter it to only IPs that need to get to it, and make sure you have a very strong password on there if you can. Because the activity we've been seeing is scanning for this. Once they find it, they try to brute force their way in, login and password into the Tomcat admin interface. And then you got 5900 TCP, which is the VNC, which is remote, a remote desktop type of thing. And I should mention 3389 TCP was up here in the slice, which is another remote desktop. That's RDP, remote desktop software. And then 22 TCP is your SSH, which is another remote desktop software. So we always talk about, those are the ones that are frequently targeted because that gives them interactive access to the device. And more often than not, these types of scans are also associated with brute force login password guessing attacks, where they try to just guess your password to get into that, that particular piece of software. And then 80 TCP web could be, I think somebody might have had a better explanation than I have for this, but could be, any type of just scanning going on in general for 80 TCP. I didn't have any particular thoughts on why they would be looking for this outright. And the ICMP 8 is an echo request. That probably not security related. And then I think these are ICMP echo replies, but I think they are, I forget what the 3.3 is, if that's not available or not.
Yeah, that's a port unreachable, I think.
Port unreachable, okay. And so when we took into the most sources probing, very similar types of things, you know, your config or weak file sharing type things, looking for 445 TCP, ICMP echo port unreachable, as Jim just said. Another one may or may not be. These could be backscatter type things or whatnot. If you get a lot of UDP activity, I think you might get a port unreachable if people are scanning on UDP, so they might be related to that as well. Telnet is in here as well. We know there's a lot of embedded devices, little appliances, home routers, whatnot, still use Telnet, still offer them up to the internet at large to be connected to. So that may or may not be something you're even aware of. You might have some kind of DSL little router at home or some other cable modem type device like that that's actually opening up a Telnet, exposing a Telnet interface for administration to the internet. More often than not, they have that disabled for internet access, but it usually is an option. Some vendors, especially particularly old ones, had that open by default. ADTCP again. The 27015 TCP is gaming, and then rounding out the chart here are all of the ZeroAccess ports: 16464, 16471, 16465, and 16470, all UDP. That's related to the ZeroAccess peer-to-peer protocol. They basically just kind of randomly try to find anybody out there on the internet to talk to, and they spew packets on these ports, UDP packets on these ports, trying to identify other peers to connect with. While we're talking about ZeroAccess, I made a new slide up, which is interesting. So in the past, I've kind of shown ZeroAccess and how it's gotten bigger over the years. It's actually kind of been about a year and a half. I think we did a birthday picture a few months ago to kind of show how it's changed over the years. Here's a new picture, which is kind of interesting. So here's how it looks today. You can see this was the initial ramp up way back when this peer-to-peer variant of ZeroAccess emerged back in, I want to say like late May or maybe early May of 2012. And you can see it really picked up speed all the way through the first few months of 2012. It kind of tailed down towards the end of 2012, but then resurged again. And I think we had talked about that on previous shows. Well, you know, I had noticed that in our pie charts, and I hadn't really been, you know, Brian's been kind of running the internet weather. I kind of noticed that it's been kind of tailing off of the probe ports, the first one that we normally show on the pie chart. And when I looked at it, I noticed, wow, it really is significantly gone down in the amount of scan flow activity that we actually see here. So within the past 2 months, I would say, it's gone down, and notably, right around here, it went down quite a bit. This looks, when I looked at it, to kind of coincide, and this is a guess, it coincides with the Microsoft Tuesday for July, which I thought was interesting. There's a big kind of decrease in activity right around that same time frame. Now, I don't know, and I didn't get a chance to go back and look because I prepared this slide just right before the show. But, you know, I wonder if there was something maybe in the Microsoft, I forget their name of their malicious software removal tool that is updated frequently. I wonder if there was something in there that helped with that, or if they're changing. I haven't heard of anything, but there's definitely a decrease in activity here, so I found that to be interesting. You know, they might have changed, and they're doing a different method than peer-to-peer, and there's still lots of ZeroAccess bots out there. I'm going to try to follow up on that and find out, but I thought that was interesting. That's the show for today. As always, if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at threattrack@list.att.com. You can also find us on Twitter at ThreatTraq. The ThreatTraq video is also available on att.com/ThreatTraq and on YouTube. and you can subscribe to an audio-only version on iTunes. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Until then, keep your network safe.